So many twists and turns when it comes to this Donald Trump trial in New York. So I had to bring in my legal eagles. There you see them up on the screen. Areva Martin and Dina Doll. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know you guys have been following this very, very, very closely. So we're going to get to the jury, but it appears in the breaking news that we have right now that Donald Trump fell asleep in court again, Areva. Is he just not interested? Is it tired? Do you think he's getting to it? I think it's an issue. I really do. I know people make fun of it, but is he really disinterested, or do you think it's getting to him?
Well, I think a couple of things, Don. One, he calls Joe Biden Sleepy Joe, but I think he should reserve that name for himself. He hasn't even been more than a week in this trial, and yet this is the second time we're hearing that he fell asleep. It's going to be an issue for jurors. Jurors watch everything that happens inside the courtroom, and they watch what the defendant does very, very carefully. And falling asleep is a sign of disrespect. It says you're not interested in your own case. It says this is boring. It says this isn't worth your time. And it's a very dismissive gesture. And I know his lawyers must be wanting to go under the table or, pour a glass of water over his head, because that's your worst nightmare as an attorney, is to have a client who is disrespectful to the juror. So I think it's going to be, or could be, a much bigger issue than just him obviously showing his disinterest.
Dina, Areva just read my mind. If you had a client who was, falling asleep in court, what would you advise him to do?
Oh, I completely agree with her. It's so bad for the jury. Here's the thing. Nobody wants to sit on jury duty for 6 weeks. Right. They're taking time out of their family, out of their jobs. They don't want to be there. So when you see the defendant do things like fall asleep, it's really going to aggravate them. I think that's why he got such a high verdict in the E. Jean Carroll case, because he was so disrespectful. He left during closings. They couldn't. If they can't do it, you shouldn't do it. And so I think for sure it's going to hurt him. And it's hurting him now because the jurors are seeing him now. Some of these jurors coming in are going to be the ones that do it. So the damage is kind of already done. During the 6-week trial, is he going to fall asleep during the witnesses? I mean, I think how he's going to be as a defendant, he might be like his own worst enemy. And then politically, this is great for Joe Biden. I mean, I can imagine a lot of the briefings you get as president are much more boring than whether or not you're going to go to prison. And he's falling asleep during an issue like that. So politically, and then also as a criminal defendant, it's really bad. And it kind of makes you question, like, is there something else going on? Yeah. Why are you sleeping during a trial that might send you to jail?
I know why. Well, he's probably up. He's not probably. I know he's up all night on his social media network, tweeting about how dishonest this is and how terrible and it's wrong. And he's so aggrieved and he's treated worse than anyone in history. I know that you have strong feelings about this, Reva, because we were speaking just a second before this all happened. But let me just give you a breakdown, and then I'll ask you the question. Because I want to talk about I'm shocked, really, that this morning that they were able to pull a jury together. It's a long slog. I think as we are taping this, they still have to get a couple more alternates. One seated juror was excused, apparently, for dishonesty. One was asked to be dismissed because people had discovered her identity. Are you surprised that they were able to impanel a full jury so quickly?
I'm not surprised. I think everything about this trial, Donald Trump would like for it to be extraordinary, because he thinks he's so special and he thinks he deserves special treatment. And he has, throughout this entire process, acted in a way that no other criminal defendant is allowed to act in our judicial system, attacking the judge, attacking the judge's daughter, attacking the district attorney. Just this morning, he said that Alvin Bragg wasn't so smart. He also made a disparaging remark about Letitia James. Well, the reality is Alvin Bragg is a graduate of Harvard Law School. And last I knew, Donald Trump hasn't graduated from anybody's law school. And Letitia James got a $450 million judgment against him. So she's pretty smart. But I think the jury and the time that it took to impanel the jury is what you would expect in a case of this nature. This isn't a capital murder case. This is a falsifying business records case, fairly straightforward. And in any other case involving any other defendant other than Donald Trump, you would expect the jury to be impaneled in a day or two.
I want to talk about juror number 2. Okay, Dina, juror number 2. The press has been extremely irresponsible in publishing so many details about her life, about her, where she lives. And I don't just mean Fox News. I mean, the New York Times did it. They reported on her job, where she works, details about her family. I was flabbergasted by this, and if something happens to that former juror, theoretically, could she take legal action against the reporters who effectively doxed her?
This is really interesting because, I was a journalist before I was a lawyer. And so I have like two minds about this because our court system is a public court system. We have an open court system. And yes, the judge in this case made the names basically sealed, like they're anonymous to the public. But he didn't do that for all of that other information. And there's a big question of him kind of asking the press to report less on the jury. It makes sense for sure when you have somebody like Donald Trump and his really extreme followers who have been shown to commit violence in his name, that the judge is concerned. But on the other hand, we do have an open press. We do have an open public court system. And so the jurors are supposed to be public. So it is really a fine line here. I think that how this should be handled is by treating the gag order against Trump very seriously. We're going to see on Monday how the judge handles what the prosecution said is 7 violations of the gag order. Because really it is Trump who is the problem. And if you silence him in a way to protect our judicial system, keep it both open and safe, his followers take his cue. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing Judge Merchan giving him very high fines and really a warning that if he continues it, that he will, send him to jail like any other criminal defendant who violated a gag order.
But Areva, listen, Donald Trump is not the one putting the jurors' information out there. And listen, I know that we have a free press as part of the First Amendment, but also in this case, listen, look at what happened on January 6th. Donald Trump supporters are very passionate, and we have seen that they can be violent. And if you put that information out there, if they're upset about being lied to, and they believed it, about an election, people who could possibly put their, dear leader in prison, who knows what they might do.
No doubt about it, Don. These are really difficult issues, I think, for the press and the judge. I agree with Dina. We do have an open court system, and in any other case, that information would be public. Now, obviously, if this woman suffers some kind of violence, or if something is done to her or her family members, and she can establish that it was because of information published by a particular media outlet, maybe she does have a case. I'm not so sure about that. Or again, these are issues of first impression.
Should they be sequestered, Areva?
Well, I think the jurors that are ultimately selected should be sequestered for sure. But again, that's a huge burden on individuals. We already have a jury system that is incredibly strained. No one likes to sign up or show up when they get called for jury duty. So the more pressure you put on the system, the less likely it is that people will abide by the subpoenas when they get them to show up for jury duty. So I don't think we need to rework our entire judicial system because of Donald Trump. That's what he would like for us to do. But I think we have to resist those impulses and within the confines of our system, hold Donald Trump accountable and not try to really alter all of the other systems that we have in place that so far have been working fairly well. I mean, until Donald Trump.
This is an extraordinary circumstance. I mean, this is the first of the former president trying to be president again who is sitting for a criminal trial. I mean, there are extenuating circumstances. It's extraordinary.
No doubt about the extraordinary circumstances. But again, we can't change all of our systems just because Donald Trump is a bully, right, and he happens to have other bullies that support him.
Good point. Dina, I want to ask you, the DA's office is saying they're not going to alert Donald Trump's attorneys and tell them which witnesses they plan to call next week. That's usually a courtesy. Why are they doing this? And do you think they should? I think I know why, because he's been trying to intimidate witnesses. Do you think that is fair at this point for them to do that? It's the right move?
It's the right move because he's shown to be super irresponsible. He's already harassing the witnesses with his tweets that he knows about.
And he use it and say, "Oh, well, see how it's not fair. We're not getting access to witnesses. We don't know. We can't prepare our case."
He loves that fair word for sure. If it was fair, he would serve time, considering Michael Cohen served time and he was part of that same scheme. So fairness can cut a lot of different ways here. His lawyers I mean, we all kind of know who the witnesses are going to be.
Right.
You know, we know who's in charge of the documents at the Trump Organization. We know about David Peck and who was in charge of the Inquirer. We know David Cohen. He knows essentially who the witnesses are going to be. It's just another one of his talking points. And also, during opening statements, the prosecutor is also going to kind of lay out who their big witnesses are, because they're giving a preview of the evidence they're going to give at trial, and the defense knows who can give what evidence.
But if I could jump in here, if you don't mind. But if I was an attorney, or like when I was preparing for exams, or I'm preparing to do this segment with you guys, I want to know what the subjects are. I know about the case in full, right? I know, it's Pecker and all that stuff, right? It's Michael Cohen, it's Stormy Daniels. It's Karen McDougal. I know that. But if on that day they say, we're going to focus on Karen McDougal, then I would study up everything, on Karen McDougal. So it doesn't really offer his attorneys the opportunity to be able to hone in on who that witness is going to be. That's what I'm saying. And listen, I know he's trying to intimidate witnesses. I'm just trying to get answers here.
You're absolutely right. Like in a typical case, a lawyer would know, oh, I'm going to be cross-examining that person tomorrow, so I'm going to prepare more for that person. Most likely these lawyers, they've already divided up who they're going to be cross-examining or doing a direct. And yes, they might not have that like final exam type brush up the night before. But I do think that the prosecution shouldn't give Donald Trump anything more than they have to, because to this point of like, we have to protect our judicial system. He basically ruined the credibility of the media the first go around in 2016. And he's really trying to do that now to our justice system. So you can't give him any leeway here. I think they really have to protect the integrity of the case.
Areva, listen, I hate to go back to this, but the case that taught me the most about the legal system was the OJ Simpson case. And I remember, Dina, when you were pointing it out, that every day, everyone had a certain part of the case that they were covering. One day Barry Scheck was doing, the thing, and then Robert Shapiro would do something, and then Johnny Cochran would do the glove. And so you're right. Everyone studies up on their expertise in the cases. If you have, like him, a whole cadre of lawyers like Donald Trump, most people, defendants, don't have that. So do you think it's okay, it's a right move for the DA's office to say, we're not going to tell you because we don't want our witnesses intimidated?
I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I think people need to stop coddling Donald Trump, and we need to stop buying into his persecution mentality, because everything that's happening to him, including being forced to sit in this trial for 6 weeks, is because of his own doing. If he didn't intimidate the witnesses, if he didn't malign the judge and the prosecutor and the judge's family members, this trial could proceed in the normal course of business. They could provide him with that information. But because he's chosen to be a bully, because he's chosen to activate other bullies across this country, he doesn't get the courtesy of knowing those witnesses. He's got some of the best lawyers in the country who presumably he's paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to defend him. They know all the witnesses that are likely to be called, do their homework, show up, be prepared, and deal with the client that you've chosen to represent. Everybody there is there on their own free will. They've chosen to represent a bully. So this comes with the territory and the job they've chosen to do. So I have no empathy for them whatsoever. And if anything, I think, again, Donald Trump has been given way too many privileges that other criminal defendants, particularly Black criminal defendants, never ever get in our judicial system.
When you were talking about the lawyers, they chose to do it. I said, you could have said no. So you're right. They could have said no, but right, they're going to be there in court. Areva, who would your first witness be?
Probably someone like Hope Hicks. We know Michael Cohen is going to be an issue because he's been convicted himself. We know he's also a liar. He's lied on other occasions. Hope Hicks is Donald Trump's confidant. She was in the inner circle. She was a trusted advisor. She doesn't have the taint of a Michael Cohen. She hasn't been prosecuted or indicted or convicted. She hasn't been proven to be a liar. So I think any witnesses they have that have impeccable credibility to date should be the folks that they focus on. And out the gate, establish that this is a very credible case with witnesses who don't have an axe to grind, like perhaps Michael Cohen does, who in fact don't even want to be there. I can imagine Hope Hicks doesn't want to be in a situation testifying against someone who she once worked for. I think those kinds of witnesses are incredibly persuasive and can set the tone for this entire trial.
Dina, I know that there's going to be a hearing about this on Tuesday to review the prosecutors. What they say are 10 instances where Donald Trump broke or defied Judge Merchan's gag order. What do you expect the judge to do when it comes to finding Donald Trump for these social media posts? Is jail actually, you believe, on the table here?
It should be on the table. And in his order expanding the gag order, he indicated he was going to take this very seriously. So I think the fines are going to be much higher than what we saw in his civil trial. I don't think he would jail him on Tuesday, but I do think that if he did it again after the Tuesday, then he might, and he should, to the point of like any other criminal defendant would be. I couldn't even imagine, to be quite honest, a criminal defendant being able to harass witnesses and harass family members of a judge who's overseeing your criminal trial. Like no other criminal defendant.
Uh-oh. We lost Dina. Oh, we got you for a second.
Back.
You're back. Yeah, you're absolutely back. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Yeah, so he should be, again, we should stop coddling him. I completely agree with that. And instead of letting Trump set the tone of him saying this is unfair, and so I do think that members of the judicial system are trying to kind of tiptoe around him in order to not feed into that narrative. That's so dangerous. Instead, we should ignore him and treat him as if he were anybody else. And if he were anybody else, to be frank, he would be jailed on Tuesday. There's no way you could harass a witness like that and not have that happen.
Areva, I want to pivot now. I want to talk about what's happening at Columbia University. I think I'm not sure about Dina, but, Areva, I've known you for a long time. You look good. But I know you remember Kent State. Because I remember Kent State, and I was getting Kent State vibes, quite frankly, yesterday when I was watching what was happening at Columbia University, obviously hoping it was without the violence. We were mere children then. I think we were negative 2 years old. But listen, this all unfolded after the president of Columbia had the NYPD in riot gear yesterday, and they arrested more than 100 students protesting the war in Gaza. On what grounds, Areva, were they arrested?
I'm not sure, because most of those students were released hours after they were arrested. I think the charges were something like trespassing or maybe some kind of unruly conduct on private property. My two daughters happen to be students at Columbia University, and they are appalled at what's happening. They are appalled at the way the university is handling it. They feel like they're in a police state. They said literally there are police on every corner at that university. It's almost impossible for students to come and go to navigate the campus. And we're about to, go into graduation season. So the university president, I felt like I watched some of her testimony. She was there to save her job. Obviously, she watched what happened to Claudine Gay, the first black female president of Harvard University, who was ousted after she testified before that same GOP committee. She saw what happened to the president of Penn. So clearly, she went with the intention of trying to save her job and not have happen to her what happened to those other presidents. But at the same time, I think one of the best, at the same time, we had the split screen of these students protesting and then being arrested. But there was a really important question asked during that hearing that I thought was so revealing. And the question was, have we ever had these kinds of hearings over, homophobic activity on campuses, over racism, over anti-Blackness, over Islamophobia? And there wasn't really a good answer given. And we know in a lot of ways this is political theater by Republican lawmakers. This isn't some real interest that they have in protecting Jewish students. And even if it is, where has that interest been with respect to protecting other students? We know we went through a horrible period in this country where African American students felt incredibly unsafe on college campuses. And I just don't remember the same fervor, the same intensity, the same passion by these GOP lawmakers. And I'm not trying to compare trauma to trauma. And if Jewish students are unsafe, they have an absolute right to feel safe on campuses, but so do other students on these college campuses. And that seems to be ignored in this conversation.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, because you're talking about the politicization of what's going on, that members of Congress, people are using it for self-aggrandizement and to, as we say, for a come-up. So I understand what you mean about that. Dina, I must ask you, were you surprised that President Shafiq took these actions? I mean, apparently she had the law on her side, but I mean, it did create quite a spectacle. As Areva said, there was a split screen going on.
Yes, it was really, I agree, disappointing. And it reminded me of how we looked back on the Vietnam era college protesters in a completely different way than how people saw them then. And the fact of the matter is, America is really focused on this Trump, right? We are so distracted. But, I'm a child of an Arabic immigrant, and I know a ton of people who have lost family members in Gaza and the West Bank. And that community, the ones who showed up to protest in Colombia, are not distracted. They are in a sense of it's like October 8th for them every single day. They're in a sense of panic around people starving to death, children starving to death, when there are roads that could be, food can be driven in. There is a sense of urgency and a sense of panic that I think there's a big disconnect when Americans see that protest and they think, they're just being disruptive or whatever. They're actually doing this because they know people who are dying. And they're trying to get people to listen. And so I do think treating that as a criminal event. I mean, there may have been certain protesters who warranted higher levels of suspension or something based on what they said or did, but certainly not the civil disobedience of just showing up and trying to make their voices heard.
I do a live show every day that I call Lemon Live at 5. I do it on YouTube. And we talked about this very issue yesterday. And I said that you may not agree with those college students, but college is an incubator, right? It's one big classroom. And what you may believe and what you may protest for when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, when you're 30, 40, and 50, you may not do it. But kids should be allowed some leeway to be able to express themselves, especially the First Amendment, which is freedom of expression, whether they're wrong or not. If they're not being violent, if they're not being, if it's not hate-filled, then what's wrong with it? They erected tents on campus. Okay, it was a sit-in. We had sit-ins. Sit-ins helped with the civil rights movement, Areva. I mean, am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Those students should be allowed to protest. They should not be arrested. They should not have their college records impacted in a negative way by this. But we've seen some outrageous conduct by adults, Don. Not the children, not the students, but adults. Doxing students, canceling offers that were made for jobs, purposely putting kids' names on blast so that they wouldn't have opportunities to work in prestigious law firms or prestigious financial institutions. I've been really appalled by the conduct of the adults and by the lack of support given to students by university administrations, not just at Columbia, but schools all over this country. And here's the irony, Don. In 10 years, 20 years, many of these same students will be getting awards. These schools will be holding up some of these students because some of them will go on to become Congress people and senators and perhaps the president of the United States or something really, they'll do something really important because they've already proven that, they care about community and they're willing to put everything on the line for what they stand for. And Columbia and some of these other universities will be praising them and, giving them accolades and saying, look, they're a graduate of Columbia University. So that's kind of the irony of this entire situation. But I hope that these students do continue to protest and that they're allowed to do so without being arrested.
Listen, I think our Jewish brothers and sisters, Jewish students should feel safe on campus. I also feel that Palestinian students and students of, African American students, LGBTQ students should feel safe on campus, but they should also be given the right of freedom of expression. So I appreciate it, and freedom of expression down at the courtroom in New York City. We'll be watching what expression Donald Trump gives when he comes out, because he could not have paid for this media, for this attention. Every camera in the world, pretty much every news organization, trained on him. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time here. We appreciate you joining us on the Don Lemon Show.